Wow, what a great group. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here on this cold Wednesday. So it's a warm hall now. All of you here. This is fantastic. So welcome. It's great to see you in the Historic Shiloh Meeting Hall. And welcome to everybody on Zoom. And sorry for the delay, but we are going to get going now. And just so you know, this is being recorded, and hopefully we'll be able to put it up online, and everybody will be able to visit it after that too. My name is Joshua Youngblood, and I'm a member of Special Collections in the University of Arkansas Libraries, and along with Dr. Trish Stark, in fact, there with all the visits, who is director of the University of Arkansas Community Center. We are grateful you could join us for this last event for Digital Buffalo. And hopefully you've been able to see some of our other Digital Buffalo events that have been going on all year, but I'll talk a little bit more about them in just a second. But before we get going any further, I'd like to give a special thanks to Rachel Whitaker, you back there. Pfizer and Andy Albright and everyone here at the Shiloh Museum. They do such amazing stuff, including providing such a wonderful community space for us to meet together. So thank you to our staff, all the amazing work, and thank you for all the amazing work you did. So Digital Buffalo, and please y'all come on in. Digital Buffalo has been a year-long series of events and activities made possible by the University of Arkansas Chancellor's Innovation Fund. Today's discussion about memory work along the Buffalo is another opportunity for collaboration between community groups and individuals around the region and research centers and programs across the University of Arkansas, including the Center for Arkansas Special Technologies, which will be unveiling some amazing work they're doing in the coming weeks. The David and Barbara Pryor Center for Oral and Visual History, the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, and the Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts program, for which we have co-sponsored tonight and directly with us. So more information on all of the Digital Buffalo events that have happened already, 5 others this year, as well as links to and recordings and information about the many fantastic events over the past year from around all of Northwest Arkansas to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Buffalo National River can be found at digitalbuffalo.uark.edu. And if you can't remember that URL, let's hold on. Big like display thing back there. Come talk to me, send me an email, I'll have to talk to you more about it. But again, that's digitalbuffalo.uark.edu. And so as part of this ongoing project, we're making available for researchers, scholars, and teachers through Digital Buffalo archival materials such as original documents and reports, interviews and resources, lectures, and interpretive passages, and maps and surveys. And the events have all been recorded, as this one will be, and they'll be posted on our website just as long as we can have them there for posterity. And then as we add digitized resources, we'll also be adding those too. So for all of your exploration of the Buffalo in the virtual space, in the digital universe in the future, please go there. And also add 7 links to all our partners to be there too. But now on to our discussion. Afterwards, we will see some documentary work produced by this link, our special guest. But I'm going to introduce our 2 speakers, and the introduction is going to happen in just a second. So first off is Virginia Siegel. Virginia is coordinator for the Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts Program, Arkansas' statewide folk arts program housed at the University of Arkansas Libraries. Among the program's numerous accomplishments since Virginia arrived is the Community Scholars Program, which provides training for Arkansans interested in finding, documenting, and presenting community culture, folk life, and traditional arts. Before joining the U of A, which I'm grateful every single day that you get done. Before joining the U of A, Siegel served as folk life specialist for the Kentucky Folk Life Program. She is active in the American Folklore Society and the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research. She's a proud graduate of the Folk Studies program at Western Kentucky University. She'll like writing some emails, write to folks about that program.
Yeah, that program's undergraduate.
Yes. But it's an amazing program that's produced some really incredible folklore that could happen in this today. And Siegel also holds a degree in historic preservation from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And so Virginia will be leading the discussion, but Misty Langdon. Many of you might know her, but I'm going to introduce her anyway. Over the last couple of weeks, I've gotten to know Misty over the phone, and so I'm glad to meet in person finally. She's owner and operator of Steel Creek Cabins and a descendant of the historic Villines family. Langdon is an independent researcher, preserving the history of Newton County and the legacy of her family, as well as the entire region. Langdon is the seventh generation of the Villines family, and her branch has been on the same farm for 131 years, and they settled on the Buffalo 185 years ago. The family recently received the Century Old Farm Award, and Langdon leads the Remnants Project, with stories of Arkansas Ozarks in the Buffalo River, which we'll learn more about. Before we get going, I did want to just read a little bit from the work that maybe you all know, or those over Zoom that maybe not have heard of. Old folks talking, but by Jim Miles. I want to read just a little bit introductory passage. When I got to learn more about Misty's work, I was reminded of this incredible documentation that happened in the 80s and 90s by the former assistant superintendent, of Buffalo National River. And also was reminded of the need to continue doing this work, preserving rivers, of talking to people, of understanding the human connection to the Buffalo River and how important that this region is to all our stories. And I say that as somebody not from Arkansas at all, who's going to be personally connected to Buffalo. So as Jim Miles says, there is a premise that this work strives to establish. It is that while the people who populated the upper Buffalo River Valley possessed customs, practices, and beliefs common to the 19th century American frontier, they were as intelligent, genteel, and industrious as any of the forefathers of America, and in some instances, as cantankerous, volatile, and but he said that therefore, the Boxing Valley holds a mirror not just to the greater Ozarks region, but serves rather as an epitome of the nation itself, in that the history and lives of the people of the Boxing Valley are a reflection of all of rural America. So, Virginia Siegel in the ceiling. I do want to also mention that we have University of Arkansas Press here, with an amazing array of books on Arkansas, Ozarks history and culture, Arkansas history, really amazing selection back there. And we also have copies of DVDs that are produced by Misty as part of the Remnants Project, and those are on sale today. And there are bargain books from the UA Press. So afterwards, after this amazing discussion and viewing the documentary, you get a chance to ask that, hang around, talk with us, and also visit the UA Press.
All right, thank you so much. So, what we're gonna do, it's a little bit like doing an oral history interview with you live in front of an audience. So we're gonna talk a little bit about you and your background and your project. Then we'll do a screening. Then we can talk some more after that. Sounds good. All right, but we'll dive in and we talked, and if you we want this to be a conversation. So if you have memories or questions you want to jump in, please do not hesitate to do that. We're happy to extend the conversation to the room. So, you ready? I think so. All right. All right. So, in a bit, we'll have the opportunity to learn about your work, the Remnants Project, of which you have lots of projects kind of under that umbrella. Yeah. But first, I'd love to start by learning more about you and your relationship with this part of the world. Okay. So let's start there.
Yeah, well, Josh hit on it just a little bit. So back in 1837, Abraham Villines and his family came to the Buffalo River. And it was, at that point, it was called the Big Buffalo River Valley.
Get the microphone
Oh,
a little bit closer, yeah. Not everybody on Zoom can hear you, I'm sorry.
Sorry. But no, they 1837, Abraham Villines and his family settled into the Boxing Valley. It was a long journey to get there. And so it's been 185 years that my family has actually lived in the same area. And for 131 years, we lived on the same farm. So not only along the Buffalo, but actually on the same farm. And Al Villines was my great-grandfather, or excuse me, my great-great-grandfather. And he is the one who got the homestead for the land that we're on now. And that was 160 acres. And, along, my parents' marriage, they have actually accumulated more parcels, and our farm now consists of 500 acres. 3/4 of our land is surrounded by National Park Service. We do have a nice buffer as far as, as neighborhoods go. And, it's been, a long history, but it's been a really good history, there on the river. I've got a little unusual story about the way that I live. I live in the house that I grew up in. And I have never lived more than 1/4 of a mile from my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents. So I can look down and see the tops of their homes and where their homes were, standing at one point. The long history.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we sort of dive into now, though, what was it like when you were growing up there?
Well, growing up, it makes it sound like that we're the only family that has been there for that amount of time, and that's not the case. It's not unusual for there to be 6 or 7 generations of a family to be in the area that we live in. They're actually probably all my cousins, but still, it's not uncommon. It is uncommon for somebody to be on the same farm. And so growing up along the river was just, people ask me what it's like, and it's just home. I don't know anything else. I don't have anything else to compare it to. I've traveled and seen a lot of other places, but there's never been a place that even came close to replacing a home.
Yeah.
And so one of the biggest things that I know about living where I live is tradition. It is self-sufficiency, it is resourcefulness. Within my family, it's music. My family is really, really musical. And the creek was just almost an extension of, and I refer to it as the creek, so Buffalo River, we tend to refer to it as the creek. And Steel Creek, we were very pragmatic, very practical. Steel Creek is the Little Creek. So there's the creek, which is Buffalo River, and then there's Steel Creek, which is the Little Creek. So if I refer to that, that's what I'm actually referring to. But I mean, just imagine growing up, and I stayed at my granny and grandpa's a lot. My mom and dad built a store at Low Gap, so we had the community store, and I got to meet a lot of people through that. But I spent a lot of my time out of my mom's hair and at my granny and grandpa's. And their house sat, I would say, from here to the back. If we went to the back wall, that's how close the creek was. So I got to live every kid's dream of, catching minnows and chasing after crawdads in the creek and, running from snakes and it was a wonderful childhood of living feral.
Absolutely. Tell me more about music.
Oh, I'm the only member of my family that on one side that cannot play. So I am the outcast, and I am the underachiever as far as music goes. I sing. No, I will not do it here.
But let's see some in the video, though.
I think I may have learned it. But we do have some wonderful musicians. My uncles had a group, a gospel group for years. They were Villines brothers. Sadly, they have all passed. That was part of their passing, was kind of part of what kicked me into gear to preserve history. I think that there's this notion that we all have so much time that we are allotted, and we think that we can just willy-nilly deal with that time. And I didn't. 2 of my uncles died, one at 58, one at 59, and one at 68. So it was something that really spurred me to do a family project, and then as all of my projects tend to go, it has just gotten wrong legs and ran off. And I thought how wonderful to be able to include other area families, because the older families, they are all intertwined in some way or another. And so it became a community project really.
Wow. Yeah. The amount of work that you put into this project is pretty staggering.
It's pretty daunting, and it gets to be, I had almost, I'm not going to say I had a nervous breakdown, but I got a little bit close a few months ago, and my husband told me, he said, stop doing all this stuff that you're not enjoying. He said, stop worrying about your paperwork with the IRS and your 501c3 that you're applying for and the hundreds of grants that you need to try to get because you're quickly going broke, funding all this yourself. And he said, go back to doing what you like to do. And what I like to do is calling up people out of the phone book and saying, hey, I'm working on a project and I think that you've got a story to tell. And I would love to come to your home and I video people. And I always have to say that because I've had a few people that are like, oh Lord, honey, if you're videoing me, I ain't and I don't blame them because that's kind of how I am myself. But no, they've been really gracious and being a local person has granted me access that I appreciate and that I'm not taking for granted. And I'm hoping to do right by every single person that I got to call an interview and I had somebody give me some feedback and say, don't call it interview, and that's too formal. And so now I call them video visits. So it does let people know that there's video. And it is just it's a chat, and it is nothing that is groundbreaking. It's a way of life, but it is a way of life that is quickly changing. And so documenting it the best I can is really important to me.
Absolutely. And I wanted to really sort of emphasize that importance, you being from the community, because I mean, I tell students all the time, like me as a folk horse going into a community, there's certain information that I'll never have access to as an outsider, and rightfully so, right? Because I'm not a member of that community. It's so important that members of the community themselves.
Well,
Our own story.
Yeah, and our area tends to be, as a lot of hill folk tend to be very guarded. And I honestly, I visited a community, it's called Sand Gap, and it's just down Highway 7 from Jasper. And there's a guy there that, man, I am just absolutely dying for him to tell me some stories. And he's like, I don't know you. And I mean, it's not far down the road. And he's like, well, we're gonna have to talk. We're gonna have to find some people we know in common. And so, there's a vetting process to one community over even for me. It's not something that I try to really not take anything that I do for granted. And that's definitely not one, because I know these people well enough to know that the minute that I step out of line or do something that I had told them I was not going to do, that access is gone. So and I want to honor them and a lot of times when you call people, they're suspicious enough that they say, well, what are we going to be talking about? And I'm like, it's nothing, you don't have to dig out the family skeletons. It does not have to be the awful stories of your past. Let's just talk about the good things and way of life, how y'all butcher hogs and how y'all butcher garden. And people, I get this all the time of, well, that be important. Why is that important? And I trot this little tidbit out that my grandsons were at the house a few months back, and one of them said, "Mom, what was your first cell phone?" when you were a kid. And I was like, honey, I was married and an old lady the first time I got a cell phone. And he said, what did you do? He's 8, and he doesn't need a cell phone, according to me. But even history is made every day. Right. So even my life, and I'm getting old, I'm 45, and I've got hopefully some more time to go. But I feel like I'm doing it. I'll clarify that from the story something. Well, and I have found that apparently I am an old soul because all of my friends now are about 90 years old. And it works out great because I don't call them after 7 o'clock. We were all in bed at this time. So my husband is like, you do know that you have turned into a 95-year-old woman in the great. It's perfect. I'm loving my life.
Like collect impulse to document your family history? Or?
Well, I guess in a way I did, and I did it not really knowing that I was doing it. A year or two ago, my mom came out with these cassette tapes that she had stored in the smokehouse. And I'm an only child, so I had to find lots of ways to entertain myself. And apparently one of those ways was to record myself on a cassette tape, talking and doing my multiplication tables. But I also came up with one of my mom just talking on the phone. So for some reason, my bunch recorded phone conversations, and these were not important conversations. I didn't know this was a thing, but it was a thing with my family anyway. And unfortunately, when I was 14, my mom and dad, because I begged, they bought me a camcorder. And I tormented my family. I ran them nuts. My granny was extremely camera shy, and we don't have a lot of photos of her. And I would chase her with that, and we can do it just for fun. And she'd go, get that out of my face, or gritting teeth, you know. And my grandpa, he laughed it up. He loved it. And unfortunately, because at that time I thought I had lots and lots of time, Grandpa would sit and tell stories for hours. And I have about 20 minutes total of his conversation. And what's really unfortunate about that is the majority of it is me zooming in and zooming out, fade to black, fading, and if you have a 14-year-old hillbilly camcorder that's got a fade button in it, we're gonna use it. And I used it a little too much, and so there's a lot of grandpa video that we can't watch without getting car sick. The first thing I invested in was a tripod. And I'm hands off when I do my interviews, because I learned every interview I do how to do a better interview. And when I saw that with grandpa, there were a lot of critiques made. You're like, all right, someone else will watch you down there. Exactly. Or, you know, take a drink on me first. But yeah, I kind of have, and I've kind of always been a family historian. So I'm the one that would dig into genealogy and ancestry, and would tell my grandparents who their great grandparents were, and they would look at me like, yeah, sure. And I was right on most occasions, you know. But family Bibles, things like that were really important back then, and unfortunately we lost ours. So there wasn't a lot of documentation on the lineage, and so there was some work to be done.
Sure. And you started to mention the inspiration behind the Remnants Project.
Yeah.
You mentioned the quilt also brought some inspiration to that. You want to share?
You know, and I've got this is my little, I go very loud when I go to people's homes, but my list of questions and things on, that I read that I give to people and try to ask them. And at the top of it kind of explains a little bit of why I call it the Remnants Project. And it's because that each little piece of fabric that we would get, you know, you don't throw anything away. So we would have a lot of quilts that are made out of these remnant style pieces. And these are just really small pieces that have been sewn together, but they weren't dared thrown away. And so they were always remnant quilts. And so I feel like the stories that I'm gathering, because time has passed and we have lost a lot of the good storytellers, I'm getting the small stories and the bits and the pieces. And if we can put those together, what a beautiful thing that can come of these little bitty remnants, and then put it together and you've got a beautiful quilt to display. And I really hope that the project, I hope that that's how that goes, that it just snowballs and home places are included and photos are, we know who are in certain photos, and so little things can add up to really great, beautiful things if we take the time to stitch them together. So that's always my quilt spiel about remnants, but that's exactly why I'm named the Remnants Project.
Wow. But this quilt.
This exact quilt here, my granny, when she passed, we found about eight or 10 of these quilt tops that she had never quilted. And some of them had started kind of coming apart, and my mom stitching them back together. And one of the ladies that I interviewed for the Remnants Project, she's 83 years old. She lives in Jasper. Her name is Villines, and she actually does all hand quilting. She's quilted since she was 8 years old, and she quilted this for me. And on this side are my racing t-shirts and running t-shirts from when I used to run. And on the top are so my blood, sweat, and tears are on this side, and my granny's are on the other.
That's actually helpful.
Yeah.
So I think you started to answer this, but when you decided to do this project, what were your first steps? I mean, there was so many different ways to go.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things that I mentioned about my uncle passing, and I kind of wanted to make it a family project, but the last time that I was in Ireland, I stumbled across a book, and it's a series of books in a heritage project that's being done there, and it's called Vanishing Ireland. And I cannot recommend these books enough. There's a series of them, and they have got some of the most exquisite photography and stories in there. And I love the book. I have one copy because there's a person in there that I know. And I started thinking about how great it would be to do that with our people, because we have such a rich history in our area. But I didn't want to stop at I didn't want it to be a book, because even though the photography is exquisite, I can't do that well on people photography. I do landscape, but not portrait. And I thought how wonderful it would be to be able to hear people tell their own stories. Instead of me or somebody else writing a quick bio about a human being, let them tell the stories that are important to them in their own words. And audio is great. There's quite a bit of audio recording that's been done in our area from the 70s through the 80s, even into the 90s. The Park Service has done some work, and then there's been some independent people that have done work. And audio is great, but visual, to be able to see that person tell their story. I think, you know, as technology progresses, it's only going to get better. And I'm really excited and happy that you get to see the person tell their story.
And again, even if it's done by like a park ranger, right? There's something to do with you doing the interview.
Well, there is, and it is, you know, I'm usually kin to the, you know, related to the people. But another thing that I noticed, even with me being local and me being kin, if I'm interviewing them kin, the stories are very different. They pull bunches because in my culture, you know, we don't talk in this company. There is still a line that men and women do not exchange certain information to one another, and you don't cross that line. And it's a thing of respect. It's a respect for age, and it's also respect for women. And so when I fish, I'm wanting to get a good moonshine steel story so bad out of my bunch, and they're all like, the only I found that for my spring where I get my water from for my house, my great aunt has steel. And my parents kept that hid from me until last year because I was not old enough to know her. Yeah, because it was, you know, liquor is forbidden. Our family are teetotalers, you know, church is very important to them. And so it's a thing of, I was not old enough to know that Aunt Faye, oh my gosh, I just threw her under the bus, but had a reason to see where my spring is. But when I talk to the women, and one thing, I try not to make this a gender project, but the men in my family have always been documented well. And I think that's just the times that they were in. I'm getting a lot more women that agree to talk to me. I've had one woman who has just recently passed that I can't talk about a lot because we're such good friends, and I'll get swollen if I talk about her. But she had never talked to any of the park rangers, and she talked to me. And I was so thrilled for that. But to be able to give the women's voices, you know, an audience, I'm loving being able to do that. And they tend to be more open to me because I'm female. So it works out, it's worked out really well there.
And I think that's, I'm excited that's important part of the documentary about the farm.
Yeah, it is. Golden Gals it's 100% women. I mean, the women are in it, and the park ranger Lauren and I, it's 100% female driven, and we're hoping to get into a couple of film festivals that are local. BFF. Bill, hello, Gina Davis, pick us up, we love you. We are really wanting to get into a few women-driven film festivals because the women in our family and our area have been a little bit underserved as far as getting their voices out, and I'm really loving being able to do that. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, it is.
I'm excited for you all to see the video, but not just yet. You weren't. So, just a couple more, and I think we'll get started, but I think you've shared some really important takeaways, but I guess this might be a difficult question, but what would be some of the most important takeaways from the project so far for you?
I think, I keep going back to this about time. And, when you start doing this kind of work, you see very clearly how quick somebody's life is, whether it's a long life or whether it's a short life, it's still very short in the grand scheme of things. And, the notion that, well, just like with my friend Dean that just passed away, I will say this about Dean, she gave me more information than anybody that I had ever interviewed about my family and about her family, sharp as a tack. And we had plans to meet and go get ice cream. And the day that I found out she died, I was in the shower and I was coming up with questions to ask her. And I have a list of questions and I have a packet of photos for her to go through to identify for me. And my husband came in and he was like, Dean died. And I was like, Dean who? And he said, Dean. And I said, she did not. They were thinking of somebody else because I just could not fathom that she was gone. And as much as I like to say, time is so important and let's make the most of our time, it gets away from us all. And we just have to jump in. If there's something that you're passionate about, and for me it's this, jump in and do it. And I mean do it with everything you've got, just do it. And if it makes sense, do it. If it doesn't make sense, do it. And because the outcome is going to be so much better if you just get it done and you don't have regrets. Because the one thing I have so many regrets about not spending enough time with my granny or my grandpa or documenting things that I wish I had. I have very few regrets about being, because I gave her things and she gave me things, and it was a very reciprocal friendship. But just not long before she passed, I was able to give her a tape of her husband and her brother giving an interview, and a photo of her dad that she had never seen. She was 91.5 years old and she'd never seen this photo of her dad. And so I have very few regrets about that, and I'm really grateful for it, because when people pass, I tend to, think of all the things that I did wrong, and I don't have a lot of regrets with Dean. But the takeaway is do it, and do it now, because time gets away from us. And if we don't get this documented, we don't have to lose. There are things that now I have no one else to ask. The questions that I have for Dean, I don't have another human being that I know that I can ask those questions.
And I think what's powerful is I spent a lot of time thinking about the amount of knowledge that lives in a person, and how important that is, to respect that alongside things like books and, the knowledge that lives in a person. But I think your story, your experience really hits home the reminder too that it lives in communities.
Yeah,
Because our stories are never fully complete, but we kind of pack things into a story.
yeah. And something that I wasn't really prepared for was asking the same question to, like, within the same family. And you get, sometimes you get a little bit different answers, but boy, I mean, you can really piece a complete history together when you start getting a lot of different perspectives from within even the same family.
Absolutely. This isn't about me, but I found some letters from when my mom and her siblings were kids, and they all described the exact same event from 3 very different perspectives of my mom getting stuck in the cellar. But then, I think that each person places on it, right? The blame each person places on it. Fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's I've asked brothers, and it's within my dad's family, so I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I try to keep a lot of my interviews very private, because I want to honor the people that I'm talking to. But my dad and his sister and brother, I've interviewed the 3 of them, and they all give me vastly different answers on different things, and it's usually to go with blame. It isn't blame for doing this. And that's one thing I tell people this all the time. The details may change in a story that is as old as some of the stories that we tell, but the bones of that story is still there. you know, things get interpreted, by the person telling the story and by the listener. So I may put an emphasis on a certain word and you take it a different way. And so it's, you know, by documenting it and people telling their own story, I feel like that is a much better way to get the point across and in their own words. So it is their words and not, you know, misconstrued.
And you know, with oral history, sometimes it's not even the factual details that are important so much of the meaning
Right.
behind
Yeah.
what they're telling you.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, there's a story that if time allows that I'll tell, and it touches on that. I mean, it's a really old story, and there's lots of different details that could have been changed and this and that, but the importance of the story is still, you know, it far outweighs any. And I tell people when they sign up, they'll say, "Well, I might not get the details just right." And I say, "I'm not going to fact check you. You tell me your story, and we'll go from there. I'm not going to fact check you. So we'll just do the best we can." I said, "Now don't write back to me. No, don't just tell me the ignoring." But you know, we'll get her down.
Love that. Okay, one more question, and then do you want to share that story before the film or after the film?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, well, I think because we talked about this question before we started, so I don't want to make sure not to miss it, but what do you think is most important for people to understand about the history and culture of the Buffalo River and the many communities alongside it?
That one, for me, was the hardest one to answer. And I took a lot of notes on that one. And I'm actually going to look at those because I didn't want to come off a certain way. The Buffalo River has seen just an incredible increase in popularity. It's gotten to the point almost, and I'm not saying we're there, but almost to the point of overuse. And I think on a conservation side and on the side of the locals that live there, it can be challenging to have an influx of that many people come to such a small area. I think the numbers, and gosh, Kevin, if I get this wrong, I know you're going to let me know, but I think the numbers pre-pandemic were about 1 million a year as far as visitors, and post-pandemic 1.5 million a year. Wow. And that's the response I get because people have no idea how many people visit. And we want people to visit. I mean, heck, I would be such a hypocrite if I said, "Oh, don't ever come." I rent cabins there. So, and you know, that's part of our family history is you make do with what you got. And, you know, our land was something we had in the proximity to the river, and that is something that we utilize to pay the light bill. But I think that just having, for people that visit the river, I think just having a little bit of respect and a little bit of reverence and knowledge that this was someone's home. The land that we're on when we're hiking or when we're floating or riding horses or whatever, you know, wonderful thing that we're doing on the park, somebody's entire life was wrapped up in that land at one point. And to have people come and litter or trespass or destroy property or some of the things that happen with the growing pains with having more visitors. I think that if we could just remember that this was someone's home. When you go through the historic you know, buildings, don't tear the newspapers down. Leave that up. That was their wallpaper, that was their insulation. It's not yours to take, and I don't find that it's unique to this area. I think this is one of the best areas in the world. I think it's everywhere that people are just getting a little bit too entitled to think that because they visit the place that when I'm on vacation I can do whatever I want, and that's everywhere. That's not, you know, just at the river, but I think if that was given, I think that the locals would have a lot easier time putting up with the traffic jams in the valley and everybody looking at the elk. And I don't think that it would bother us half as much as if people acted a little bit friendlier and just maybe, you know, and I don't want to come off sounding like we expect people to bow down to us because we're local, but just a little modicum of respect to, you know, give, and I think would go a long way. Yeah, because we are so high on tradition.
Right. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is, I think there's this perception that you force people off the land and then, so they no longer have ties to it, but people in your community still have that strong tie to that land, whether they're living on it in that moment or not.
Right,
It's, that tie didn't go away.
it is, and you know, there are places on the park, there are restrictions, on hunting and things like that, because for safety's sake, or around campgrounds and things like that. One of my cousins just harvested a massive 11-point buck down on the river, and we were all really excited, and we're all really grateful that opportunity is still available for the locals and the people that want to do those type of activities safely. But it is very important to act the way that you would want somebody to act in your backyard. You know, I have had people literally walk into my yard and be plundering around and me asking what they're doing, and they're like, we're hacking. And I'm like, well, you're on private property, you know, it's just like that common sense checks out sometimes. And we need a little bit more common sense.
You know, though, visitors might not have the ability to distinguish different changes of landscape, like people who live there too.
Well,
you know?
they might not, but they're gonna open, they crawl over.
Well, yeah.
And so we do have our property well marked, because we do get a lot of strangers. And I'll throw myself right in here because, you know, I was working out in the garden several years ago, and park ranger showed up, and I was like, oh, what's happening now? You know, and it's a guy I knew, and he was great, and he was like, yeah, I had just gotten 5 new cows, and he said, Misty, do you have any cows? And I said, where are they? Where are they? And he said, well, they're down in Steel Creek, and they're heading to Ponca, and they're going hard. And they did the hiking trail. And so it's a well worn out trail. And luckily, the way that I raised my stock, it paid off. And I walked down with, and I told him, I said, I gotta take a dog, you know, and dogs are not allowed off leash. And he was like, bring your dog. And took the dog, took the bucket, and we walked the walk of shame through the Steel Creek campground, and all the campers going with me in the front, shaking a bucket, 5 cows and a dog bringing up the river. And we walked all the way home, which it's not that far, but a hacker had crossed into our fence and left the gate there. And so, you know, when I got there, and I explained it to the park ranger, and there was no ticket, or, you know, if you meet them with the same type of respect that you want, it's going to be it's going to be a great relationship, and we have a good relationship with the park. And so I didn't get a ticket, luckily, and we did not eat steak that night. So everybody's.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a pretty good story, but I think we should hear your other story.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, the story that I kind of prepared that I like to tell so much is a story about Tim Villines. And if you don't know about Tim Villines, I highly recommend that you research him. There's a lot of information out there about Tim and his life in Boxley Valley. And I refer to it as Boxley Valley because that's what it's known as now. At that time, it was actually called the Big Buffalo River Valley. And Tim's story, this story takes place in 1864. So it's 158 years old. So to me, this goes to show the importance of oral history. This story has been told enough times, and there may have been a few details changed. I don't care. I'm just so thrilled that it exists. And Tim's story starts with his mother, Melissa Villines. And Melissa was actually born into slavery. And he was gifted to Elizabeth Penn Villines, who was the daughter-in-law of Abraham Villines, our patriarch of our family, the first Villines to move to the Big Buffalo River Valley. And Melissa came here with them in the wagon in 1837. They arrived, and she had 3 sons that we know of, 2 of which were sold in chains, and Tim. And when Tim was about 13, so 1864, the Civil War had gotten increasingly dangerous in the Boxley area. Tensions were really high, and Boxley was actually under threat of being completely destroyed. There were homes were being burned, livestock was being driven off, and men were being abducted. So any man that wasn't in the war, they were under threat of abduction and ransom, whether you paid the ransom or not, most of the time they were killed. And there's an account of women finding 3 dead bodies that were unidentified and they buried them the best that they could. So things had really deteriorated in the valley and they were under severe threat. And another gentleman had been abducted, and this kind of spurred on the actions of Patty, and we call her Aunt Patty. And Aunt Patty set him on a mule at 13 years old and instructed him to go from Boxley to Huntsville to John Murphy's. And John Murphy had left Boxley Valley to be closer to Union forces where there was a little more safety, and he had a group of young men with him. And so Tim set out on this mule, and I Googled it, and it's 35 miles from Boxley to the Huntsville area. And so about Dry Fork, there's an altercation, and Tim, his mule is taken from him. So he is left with the decision of, do I go on? What do I do? And thankfully, Tim goes on. He makes it to John Murphy's. He gets reinforcements. The men go to the valley, and the valley is safe. And the fact that we can credit the safety and the well-being of Boxley Valley to a 13-year-old who was born into slavery, that is a fascinating story to me. Tim's life was an incredibly unique story. It's known that he was always accepted in the homes of the older folks in Boxley Valley. So the ones that were old enough to remember what Tim had done, he was welcome in their homes even as an adult. And a few generations later, that seems to have deteriorated a little bit. And he lived out his life in Boxley. He not only farmed in Boxley, but he was also a landholder. So he had his own farm, he owned it, and he worked it. He was married, and not legally married, but he had 2 partners, and they were white women, not at the same time. Yeah, I need to refine that part of my story. One thing that I found in researching Tim is a census record, and because they were not able to be legally married, Tim built a house right beside his wife's house. So there were 2 homes side by side, and
I think you're fine.
and the 2 homes were side by side, and at that time, census takers went from home to home. So you get a good idea of the community based on census records. And so the census taker comes to his wife's home, Rosetta, and she's got a house full of kids. And the census taker asks her marital status, and she's married. She's married. He goes next door and he asks Tim's, and Tim is single. And I have a feeling that may have had something to do with just the safety measure that, that might have been information burned outside. Another wonderful aspect about Tim's life is that he is buried in the Beechwood Cemetery. And he's not buried off somewhere, he's buried within the boundaries of Beechwood Cemetery. He was 68 years old when he died in 1919. And the fact that he is buried along with the other residents of the valley, I think is just an absolutely wonderful testament to how he was regarded within the community. And it also goes to show not only the importance of these old stories and all stories being told, it makes me wonder about all the stories, the extraordinary ones that weren't told, that were lost to time. And the second point is that how easy it is for us to forget when other people help us. A lot of times we like to pat ourselves on the back and we can remember the help that we've given to others, but how quickly we can forget the help that we receive. And so that's Tim's life. It gives me a really good reminder of let's all be like that older generation and be mindful of the things that other people have done for us.
Okay, so let's watch this amazing film.
All right.
Want to set up for us?
Yeah, sure.
Tell us about it.
And tell us a little bit about the other one that we're not going to see. You're out there
Okay.
for us too.
Okay, well, the one that we're fixing to watch is Big Buffalo Golden Gals. And it is back in December, I came up with an idea of taking my mom and some of her cousins down the creek in a raft so that they can tell stories and, hopefully that I can video those stories so that I would remember them. And, visit the places where they grew up and where they were raised and tell us some stories about that. And I got in contact with a friend of mine at the Park Service. Her name is Lauren Ray. And she's actually moved on from the Buffalo National River to another park in New Mexico. And it's a great loss to our community because she was absolutely phenomenal. Our loss is definitely New Mexico's gain. But she went because I was a little bit, I wasn't able physically to man the raft. So she did all the work. And we fed her fried pies and I hope it was a demon trap. She said it was. She said that it was. She lied to me. She said it was a good day, but yeah, we go down the river, and Jane is one of the ladies in the video, and her grandmother is Granny Henderson, and a lot of people may know that name. They would take her mother, who's in, we call her actually I think it's Arby, but we call her Orb. And they would pack her when she was in her 90s. They would put a bean bag in a raft and float her down the river to her home place so that she could visit it. And they did that just about every year until she was unable to do so. And I thought, how cool to be able to do that for the next generation. So we have my mom, who is 75 in the video. We have Linda Clark and Jane Kilgore and Laura Matlock, who I'm telling you, she was the star of the show. She is 83 years old. And it was all we could do to keep up with that woman on the trail. She's a force to be reckoned with, and she's an amazing human being. And I've known these women my entire life. And I cannot tell you how much closer we all are after this experience, because it was literally one of the best days of my life. And then the other video is just a video of snippets, if we get to that fine, and if not fine, which is just pieces of the interviews that I've done in the past that have been pieced together to show people what the interview process is like, how painless it is, hopefully, and hopefully to encourage other people to sign up and do that.
Okay, so
Yep.
I'm gonna share the screen just a second. The caption will get out of the way. There we go. Uploads.
And this is actually, just so y'all know, this is, we started at Ponca and we ended at Kyle's. So this was not a short run. This is an all day.
Say hi, everybody. This is May 10th, 2022. Oh, look at that turtle.
You just, we've been talking about it for a while.
We've been talking about it clear from up yonder. I said,
Lord.
look at that.
I don't have my hearing aids in.
Meet the crew. On the left, 5 amazing women whose shared roots go all the way back to Abraham Villines, whose family moved to the Big Buffalo Valley in the 1830s. And then there's the obvious outsider on the right, who's just here to listen and learn and maybe narrate a little bit. Each of these women grew up within the boundaries of what we know today as the Ponca Wilderness of Buffalo National River. Their lives here are part of a layered history of human use and occupation that's been happening along the Buffalo for thousands of years. The trails that park visitors hike and ride were once the roads that connected communities. The descendants of those who built homesteads by the river are still here, and their stories show a lasting legacy of stewardship and love for this land. But don't take it from me. These are their stories to tell.
Be a good place to take a shower. We just took it for granted when we lived down here.
I asked Mom the other day, I said, did Granny Henderson or anybody ever go down to the Hemden Hollow? And Mom was like, no. She said everybody was working too hard.
One of the common themes of the stories these women tell and embody is that the people here are some of the hardest workers you'll ever meet. Determination and grit are in our blood. Take Jane's granny, Eva Barnes Henderson. Eva and her husband Frank built a cabin near the mouth of Sneed's Creek in the Buffalo River in the early 1900s. When Frank passed away in the 1950s, Eva didn't leave her home. She continued life as she'd always known it, tending to her livestock, carrying water up from the creek twice a day, and sustaining herself well into her 80s without the modern comforts of plumbing, electricity, or a telephone.
How old was she when her husband died?
She lived there since Grandpa Frank died about 17 years. 17
Wow.
years.
That's a long time to be carrying water. And
2 generations later, Jane continues to carry this torch whose flame of fortitude and resilience has been passed down from the Ozark mountain women of yesteryear. So often, history excludes these women's stories of independence.
And Grandma Orphy sold $3,000 worth of milk and stuff.
wow.
She had all that saved up, all that change and stuff.
In a meal sack.
Yeah, and she saved it, and that's when she bought the place up on Mount Sherman.
And believe it or not, they took it to the bank, and I think it took them 2 days to get it all sorted out and done. That little old meal sack was plumb, no telling what it weighed. It was all change. She kept the change. It wasn't dollars.
You sure don't hear much about women who independently worked and paid for their families' homes back then. But the thing is, tenacious women were everywhere. Tenacity is what it took to make a living in these rugged hills and hollers, and mothers and fathers taught that to their children early on.
There they were, a plow in a big field, and some of the kids was out there helping work, and you just don't see that anymore.
And when the kids weren't helping their family tend to farm chores,
They walked 3 miles and crossed 2 or 3 shoals to get to Center Point to school.
Oh, they ain't no telling how many creeks we crossed.
Yeah.
And we didn't think anything about it being a long way or anything.
so there's some truth in that old saying. You know the one, uphill both ways in the snow and rain. Kindergarten through 8th grade were taught in one-room schoolhouses across the Ozarks. Remnants of these schoolhouses can be found all over the Buffalo National River. So the next time you're trudging through the backcountry, imagine taking that same trek multiple times a week as a young child. Back then, you really had to earn your education. Hard work and dogged determination, these are the qualities of the Buffalo River home folk.
Let's go back and do that again.
That's the best.
hang on, Jane.
Oh, that was fun.
What you think about that, Lower?
I like that.
I did too. But I remember when she had Howard, he was born early. Look at that big old turtle right there, 2 of them.
Oh,
Trying to get up that knife, he's sliding. But anyway, she didn't give enough milk, so she walked twice a day down to Aunt Vi's. And Aunt Vi fed Uncle Coy and Howard.
Oh.
She did. She did. But they didn't have pumps back then, or no way to pump it out, you know, for her to take some home with her.
LC's mama had LC, and 6 days later, Helen had Buster, and Helen couldn't give no milk hardly.
Right.
And Olive went and nursed them both.
Yeah, I think I did that too.
Strong family groups and community ties were a means of sustenance and survival. People supported each other when times were tough, and they shared their prosperity when times were good.
One time, Grandpa Bill and several of his brothers was down here. You know, they would work and get those logs and move it to the creek. Well, they had set them a big old fish line down here by what they call the lower mud cave, the mud cave. And he had his fish lines set out, and he'd say, "Boys, let's go check our lines." And away they'd go, and they'd get down there, and Uncle Fred was with them, and said he pulled his line in, and he had this huge, big old catfish. And he got it almost up to the boat, and that broke, and Uncle Fred jumped in right after that fish. And he caught that fish, and Grandpa said, "We took off and had a fish fry."
Of course, sustenance was the goal, but indulgence was a rare luxury.
We used to drive down from Center Point in an old truck, and Grandpa Bill come with us, and the whole lot of the family. And we spent the night at Harpsole Place, Harpsole Place. And they had a pear tree there, and we'd all got pears. Of course, that was back when you used to be able to drive down here. And we just had such a good time.
Yeah, my grandma knew how to just mix that sweet gum wax just perfect, where it wasn't crumbly or whatever. And she had a big cood laying in her little, it was like a little china cabinet in the kitchen. And me and Rosie would go down there, me and my sister would go down there, and she'd say, "Now, wait, when Grandma goes outside, you watch, and while I chew it a while, and then I'll watch while you chew it a while." We put it back, and that's pitiful.
And she never knew?
No.
The brown sap of the sweet gum tree can be hardened into a natural chewing gum with medicinal properties. Those who lived off of the land knew the health benefits of each plant around their home, a tradition passed down among the generations. It was often the women of the family who would cultivate and gather medicinal plants to create natural remedies and tinctures for every ailment. Before the days of supermarkets on every corner, and still to this day, many Ozarks families sustained themselves by fishing, hunting, foraging, and gardening, working their own land and using their own labor to survive.
I don't remember what all Mom cooked.
That one went
Mom
in the
could
water.
make fix them raccoons. Oh, they were so good. She put sage on them and baked them. Oh my, they're so good.
Might be a turtle.
She put a lot of sage on them. Mama raised her own sage, did your grandma? Yeah. We had 4 or 5 gardens going at once. Tater patch and tomatoes. Yeah.
Grandpa used to sit on this rock, and he had a little corn cob with his fish line tied around it, and his hook, and he always kept it in his back pocket. And they'd say, "Where's your fishing pole?" He said, "Right here." And he would undo that, and he'd have a crawdad, and he'd stick it right under that rock. And Mama's done it many times too, and catch goggle eyes.
Well.
Yes.
And he'd have us a mess of fish time we got down there the fort. It was Halloween evening, and I wasn't going to get to go to the tacky party. And
the what?
Clarence and Daphne.
To the what?
Tacky party. They called it the tacky party.
Oh.
It's going to be at the Mount Sherman School. Mother put on Dad's old red underwear, put a filler in the back and the front, and Dad sent me down we'd milk the cows, and he sent me to put them in the pasture. I put them in there, and the gate was made out of lumber, and I pulled it too because I couldn't lift it, and it scraped the ground, and I started to fasten it, and I seen a little bitty edge of something that shined. And so I went and dug it out, and I ran to the house and showed it to my mom, and Daphne said, "I'll give you $2 for it." Mom got it, and she said, "No, it's a 16 karat gold." She said, "Honey, this fits on my other finger." And she said, I'll keep it for you until you get married. And she actually did.
And you were 8 or 9?
Probably just 8.
And that's how you found your wedding ring?
That's how I found my wedding ring. And it's been on this hand for, 64 years?
Family was the cornerstone of life and society in the Ozarks, where the topography is inherently isolating. People had to travel a pretty good ways to visit with friends and neighbors, so church gatherings, community dances, fish fries, and tacky parties helped rural folks come together for food and fellowship.
We used to have big old fish fries on the 4th of July, and Grandma Orphe'd stay there and watch all the kids. She would fry this huge, big old dish pan full of potatoes. And us kids just run up and down the creek and played. And the men and the women went and grabbed suckers and fished, and then we had fish to fry. We had the biggest time.
We always got a pair of shoes for decoration, just one pair, and then one pair for school, and that was it. But she couldn't afford no more because Mama had 9 kids. Well, it come that flood when it flooded Harrison. And it was in May, and the decorations always in June. Well, me and Rosie stood upstairs of our house and watched the car go down the river. And we just cried and cried because our shoes was in it and didn't think nothing about the car. Isn't that just like kids? We found it down at the suck hole, on the bank, with just the tires sticking up out of the sand and gravel.
Access to an automobile could mean life or death down on the Buffalo. Birthing mothers and folks who were seriously ill would have to find a way to the nearest medical care in Harrison by whatever means necessary.
Well, Mom and Daddy married in 1947, and they lived up here in the old Bonar house. And it's just a 2-room old house, and they lived there. That's right. And when they got ready to have me, they brought Mama out off the mail truck and had me, and went to Harrison. And then when she had me, she brought me back on the mail truck.
I think that's the neatest. I love that.
But the lack of access to emergency services didn't deter some kids from causing mischief.
Anyway, it was a 1-room schoolhouse. They was all up there, and Mama told me, and I bet you was there that day. And Frankie told them, said, "Now, don't you go to the creek." It was recess time, and said, nobody go to the creek, and it was really cold. And first thing, Ruth went out and got on this old limb, and she fell off into the water. Well, Aunt Frankie brought them all in, wrapped Ruth up in the towel, or in the flag. She wrapped her up in the flag. Yeah. And give all the rest of them a whooping. Yeah.
Brought her home on a horse, half drowned. It's terrible.
We can all probably relate. Despite the risk, the lure of this river transcends time and reason. There's something entrancing about watching it flow by, something restorative about swimming in its depths, and something giggle-inducing about bouncing down its rapids in a yellow raft with the people you love.
Oh, that's so much fun. Oh, Lord. Looks like it's just on me. Oh, my God.
Hang on.
Oh, Jesus, help us.
Oh my God. I just beat up oh my gosh. So much fun. Oh Lord, I did see Misty. Oh Lord. Come. Oh, we done good. Thank you, Lord.
Every place you've ever been, every place you'll ever come to love, has a human story beneath the surface. May we remember and honor the ones who stewarded this land before us. May we listen and learn from their traditions. May we help them share and preserve their stories of the past, as their stories are their legacy, and their stories are our heritage.
Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful, beautiful buffalo. Yes, we'll gather at the river, flowing by the throne of God.
If I have to make the crossing of the Jordan deep and wide, and you linger in this life, I promise you, when your life on earth is over and you come to cross the tide, I'll be waiting at the river for you. No more heartaches, no more sorrows, no more tears to dim the eyes. I will never say goodbye again to you. Hand in hand we'll stroll together, walking heaven's avenue. I'll be waiting at the river for you.
I don't think I've ever watched that and not laughed and cried. It's just a little too personal, even though I'm the one that edited it and know every word of it. I do have to say that Lauren Ray, she did so much work on the editing process and she did the captions. And so we do have to absolutely thank her for her contribution, which was great. I emailed Misty right after I watched it. I was like, I can't wait till I see you in person. This is the best thing I've ever seen. Go for it. I mean, it's so good, and the message at the end about listening to traditions. That line that Lauren says at the end, she put that in, that was one of her contributions, and that is one of the most meaningful things, because that is exactly what I'm after, and that's exactly what I strive to do. So to honor those traditions, because a lot of times the people that I deal with, they are not rich monetarily. The only thing that they have is their stories, their family Bible, or their photos. And so to know that they trust me enough to be able to deal with those, that's a huge thing for me. So well, we have about 12 minutes for questions. But I have a question to get us started. I need to know what is the Jackie Party? You know, this is really strange because about a month ago, well, around Halloween, it's a Halloween party, it's a costume party. And in the Waking community, which is not far from Jasper, my grandsons we were tagged in a photo and they had a tacky party. So it's not something that's completely lost. It is something that's still practiced in certain areas. And it's kind of a tacky dressing up party. And I think the man said because it was not really tacky. That's my interpretation. Well, I mean, we can open it up for questions or yeah, if anybody has any questions before.
No, please.
You said your grandparents' house was real close to the river.
It was, it's close to Steel Creek, so the Little Creek, and not the river, but, Yeah, my mom was actually born at Steel Creek, so if you're familiar with that area, there's a rock house that sits where the Valley-wide ranch was. And Mr. Yarbrough had that house built, and it replaced the home that my mother was born in. It's a yellow 2-story house that sat there. So they moved up the creek a ways, but my grandparents lived one generation. I live in the house I grew up in, I live in the house I grew up in, I live in the house she grew up in. And you can catch minnows off the deck now. So it didn't flood, no. My husband is so concerned about this, and he always says, why in the world do they put that house there? But it has been there, the log cabin that my mom was raised in was moved from the Steel Creek area. So it was moved up the creek, and it is huge logs. It's 12, 14-inch oak logs, and they are dated back to about 1869. And those logs were moved, and that house was put there, and the creek literally almost wraps around that house. And every bit of wood we've got, it has never flooded. So this last rain we got 2.5 inches, and it came closer to flood than it ever had before. It went over their spring box. And so that's kind of how they gauge the creek is with their spring box.
So Renee Banks on Zoom says, well, she wants to know, is the video available for purchase? Which
Absolutely. And this video, I have to say, everybody has to buy one or you cannot leave. It is the only fundraiser that we have. So I have put all of my efforts into the documentation process right now and have cooled on applying for grants. And I know that's what I need to be doing. It's just not what I can be doing right now. And so the only monies that we're coming up with is monies from the sale of the units right now.
So how could you purchase it? If you're
You
not here?
can contact me through email. It's very archaic in the way that I'm doing that, which is probably when I still have quite a few of those to sell. But they're $12, and all the money goes to the Remnants Project, and it is a 501c3. I did get that.
So she did also ask for your contact information, but she also wanted to let you know that she herself is a Villines descendant and would like to contact you about that too.
Great. Well, cousin, hello. And my email is steel, STEEL, creek cabin, no S at the end, @gmail.com. And I'm sure that you can get in touch with me a myriad of ways, and I'll get you one. Okay, don't be shy. Oh, there's one over here.
So I'm wondering about Tim Villines offspring. Did they live back to Valley, or did they?
They did. There are no descendants of Tims that we know of that are left in the area at all. And I think they first moved into Oklahoma. Several of them moved into California. And I believe that one is documented as being right at 100 years old and died fairly recently. And unfortunately, it was before I was able to touch with them. Hopefully someone else has. Fingers crossed. But he did have a large family. There were several children. Matter of fact, I think, and we're not completely certain, but I think that we may have a photo of one of his children. His children did stay long enough that they helped some of the farmers with menial tasks and stuff on their farms as they were, big enough and old enough to help. And we do have a picture that we think is possibly one of his children, one of his sons.
Was that Stearns woman, the woman that was from the Park Service? Who is that?
Her name is Lauren Ray, and she's a park ranger.
I've had her before.
Oh, have you? Yeah, she's absolutely one of the most wonderful people that I have ever met in my life. And if every park ranger was like Lauren, oh man, things with the community spirit and things. She has got such a heart for our community. And it is absolutely, she's just one of a kind.
If you're curious, you can go on YouTube and look up raps about the buffalo. Never check the rap song about the buffalo. She got a little viral on there for a little bit.
Well, she's an incredibly talented singer and musician. And she's got, and you can go to Buffalo National River Facebook page, and I think that there are several instances of her singing on there. She's phenomenal.
Yeah, one of the things that, somebody from the audience has a question.
You know, Jane, because they had taken her mother down, many, many times. But the other ladies, most of them had only been down in a flat bottom boat. So when I was about 8 years old, my grandpa took me for the first time down the river, and that was in a flat bottom old boat. I had never sat in a canoe or a kayak until I think the first time I went canoeing, I was 16 or 17 years old. That was not something that was, we did it just to fish. It wasn't like it was, oh, we're gonna go canoeing. And now I have kayaks and well, I ran into Miss Gina Booth several times kayaking. And so it was just a little different for us back then, but it was mostly flat bottom boats, which are incredibly strange to, now that I do kayak and canoe, it's a very different process to get one of those down the river.
Jim Villines, I think, this current gravestone is relatively new.
It is.
I think his original one was quite small. Do you know how that new one got there, or the story behind that?
Well, I'm not sure exactly who replaced that stone. I do know that there is a gentleman, and his name is Travis Holt, and he's in the Newton County area, and he goes to many cemeteries, and if there is just a rock with no name or anything like that on it, he is working really hard to document those. I don't know if that is his work. There are other people in the area that are doing that work. Sue, do you know?
Yeah.
Oh, it was. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. It was nice that he had a marker to begin with, but to have him a good, storyline. Great.
Other question, you mentioned Ireland, did your family come from Ireland?
Yeah, I don't think that the Villines were particularly from Ireland. I think that there was Irish probably thrown into the mix. I think Villines, the surname is mostly from France. That was the jump from France to the United States is the jump that we kind of documented. But I do have a lot of Irish and Scotch ancestry to fall back on. So it looks like the almost all the Villines men must have married Irish girls of some descent, because my profile is very much Irish and very much from Appalachia. Culture and tradition and things like that are very similar.
So how did they find those?
Well, that's something that, and I do have a cousin here, so if I get out of turn, she'll let me know. But some of this is kind of inferred by me, so it's not something that I know for a fact. But I believe that Abraham and his family came upon some hard times. They had huge plantations in North Carolina where they were from. And some reason or another, they went broke and they came here with only one slave instead of, a host. And they came here. You don't leave big sharecropping territory and come here and think you're going to farm, or to the buffalo especially. But it was free land. And so I think that either it was an adventure of new land and coming, or there was a hardship and they moved out of necessity. He moved his entire family except for one son. And so that was a big, that was a big group that left one entire family.
Possibly there was a rift between two brothers.
That I had heard about a rift, and I'd also heard that his father-in-law was very wealthy, and I kind of wondered if when his first wife died, if that well might not have run dry, and he was like, well, on to greener pastures. That's kind of my, take on it. I hope I'm right. I'm not proved it completely, and I'm not disproved it. So it's kind of a working theory.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, there we go.
Are we going to pick up the video?
No, we don't have time tonight.
We don't, and if it's okay, John had extended the courtesy of putting that on YouTube. And if we can upload that to YouTube, you guys can have access to it. I don't know how long it'll stay up. I always check with my people about whether it's on social media, things like that. Because it's not their entire video and it's only a snippet, we won't have any problem with that. So we would, if that's something that's still out there, we'll do that. So just keep an eye on their YouTube page.
I just checked with my digital Buffalo partner back there, and we will make it available through the website as well.
I don't wanna say things that I can't.
No. We would love to, just as long as we can.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
So you have a, URL for that?
It's the.
Oh, it's down over here. It's digitalbuffalo.uark.edu. Yep, and it's also in the press release that went out, and my name's Joshua Youngblood. You'll find me. You want me to wrap it?
Yeah.
Well, I'll get in front of the camera. So I did have a question, which I'm not going to ask you about, but just as someone who spends all day or mostly all day in an archives and special collections, there was a remark that you made earlier this evening about the story that was beyond the census records. And you look at the census, and then this whole depth of the story about Tim Villines wasn't there. And it was the memory keeper that allows us to know that. And it's been such an amazing, well, frankly, just a really moving moment for me. I do want to point out, though, that you do have some great documentation here and examples of other work, and I know that you have more projects coming out. We'll keep as you mentioned, we will work to get the videos that are available up on digitalbuffalo.uark.edu. There's also material about AFTA, the Arkansas Public Traditional Arts, which Virginia Siegel coordinates. They do amazing work. If you are a master craft person of some sort, she wants to speak to you. Or if you want to do community memory work yourself, so she would love to talk to you about that. And so we have some documentation right over there on the table. And please visit the UR Press back there. All books, all the stuff for this piece, and it's very good. So thank you all so much for being here. It's a wonderful night. Thank you so much to Misty for coming over here and meeting with us, and thank you, Virginia, for this.
Words too.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I just want to say the Community Scholars Program too is basically a program we take to different communities where, the community asks for it, we bring it to them. But the idea is to give community members tools to do projects like exactly like this, like what you were already just doing. So if you're interested in projects like this and want to know how, keep an eye out on our Community Scholars Program. But of course, you can always ask Misty.
I wish I had known about that before, because it would save me a lot of work and a lot of consciousness. But one thing that I do want to mention that I forgot to mention is another aspect of the Remnants Project is that not only do I visit with people, but I scan their documents and their photos for them. So, I can work with a collection as big as 4 or 5 pictures or 4 or 5,000 pictures. I've encountered both of those. And the scans, I scan everything for them. They get a digital copy and it's 100% free to them. So I don't charge anybody anything for contributing to this. I feel like it's just a community project that they're gracious enough to contribute to. And hopefully that will all be online so that you can also look through those photos and see a bigger portion of the heritage and the history of the people that I've met.
Definitely as the Remnant Project progresses, we'll be making sure to keep the work. Thank you.
And also,
Okay, this is one.
and a lot of the material you collected is available from the Jasper.
Yes, everything, all of the videos in their entirety and some of the collections are at the Jasper Library. This book in particular is one that I'm really proud of. This project is not something that I've created just on my own. There are people in for me that paved the way for this. Now Flood, Tommy House, Dwight Cakeley, Jim and Susie Lyles, Dr. Robert Flanders. All of these people were doing all of this work way before I came along, and I'm just trying to pick up where they left off, and hope it's made this the same for everyone.
So again, thank you so much, Misty Langdon. Yeah. Here and helping us and letting us be it's fantastic. Thanks. No, that's it.